All right, week 2, let's get it done. So what we're going to be talking about this week is consumer behavior and elasticity. So elasticity is essentially how responsive you are to a price change or income change, right? So when your ability to purchase is different, how does that affect the quantity demanded of consumers? Do they want more? Do they want less? So what we're going to go through, the first video is going to go through elasticity, talking about own price elasticity, cross price elasticity, income elasticity. We're basically going to start ramping up the speed of this course very quickly. So last time we started talking about the very basics of microeconomics, going into like demand, supply, all those pieces. This week, we're going to start going into elasticity. So really understanding the nitty gritty mathematical parts of how responsive people are that we can measure within those graphs. Then we're going to go into consumer behavior. At this point, we start shifting from principles of microeconomics to intermediate microeconomics. So we start shifting through. We're going to be looking at indifference curves, consumer preferences, how we know among a bundle of goods what consumers might like, how they might value them. We're going to think about budget constraints. So if we have a limited amount of income or a limited amount of goods available to choose from, how would people make those decisions? Then we're going to think about the consumer equilibrium when we put together this consumer behavior with the constraint behavior, and then we're going to talk about difference curves. So this is going to seem like it's starting to go very, very fast because we did the easy stuff last week. It's the medium stuff, and then it's going to get a little bit harder after this. Don't panic. It's going to be okay. We got this all together, and we're going to make it through. We're going to be all right. So let's start off with elasticity. So this is kind of a fun one. I like elasticity. Before we even go deep into elasticity, I just want you to know what we're talking about. So at first, we're going to be talking about the price elasticity of demand. The same thing can happen for supply. We're going to start looking at it in relationship to multiple markets and multiple things like that. But let's talk about what the nitty gritty is. What the nitty gritty is we're just wondering just essentially how responsive people are to a price change. So let me give you 2 demand curves. We got our price, we got our quantity. It might help if you actually practice doing these yourself, but in both we have a downward sloping demand curve. So let's say we have 2 situations. In the first situation, we have a relatively flat demand curve. In the second situation, we have a relatively steep demand curve. Now, what's really the difference in between them two? Well, what's the difference between the two is how this relationship in between quantity and price changes. For example, let's say that we have a price point right here. We're going to call this price 1. So maybe the same place right here, price 1. Okay, well, if we go over to price 1, we know that we have some amount of quantity 1. And then we go over here, some amount of quantity 1. Well, let's say that in both of these markets, there's going to be a price raise, right? Let's say that the price goes up to price 2. All right. And then this goes up. Let's make it look like about a similar amount, price 2. So maybe this represents like a $1 increase. Well, what we see in the first situation is the new Q2. We go from price Q2, so Q1 to Q2. Notice that this is a very large quantity demand change, right? The amount that consumers want at that new price point has drastically reduced for this small price increase. We call this an elastic market, where the price elasticity of demand is really high. People are very, very responsive to price changes. Small price changes can have all of your customers leaving the store. The other side, we have, for example, the same price change. Where would our new Q2 be? Well, notice if we go from Q1 to Q2, the quantity demand doesn't really change at all. There's a very small change in quantity relative to this change in price. We call these inelastic markets. If I could spell today, inelastic. Yeah. So when we're comparing the two, we need to think about, well, what really is the relationship in between price and quantity? Because if it's something that if you put it on sale, you're going to double the number of customers in your store, well, that's really important to know. If it's something where if you raise the price even a little bit, you're going to lose your target market, that really matters. And the elasticity allows us to compare in between different markets. The one on the right could be apples and the one on the left could be oranges. We could actually kind of compare apples to oranges in real life because we're going to be looking at some numerical value of this relationship. So we'll have 5 and 6. Well, we can compare 5 and 6. We can compare apples to oranges. So that's what we're going to be going through as we're talking about elasticity. So within elasticity, we have the price elasticity of demand. This is the very basic original elasticity piece. And notice that this has to do with the demand curves that we had just looked at on those graphs. So when the price rises by a large amount, we need to know, does the quantity demand go down by a little bit or does it go down by a lot? The responsiveness of the quantity demanded, how much people are wanting at that price point, that responsiveness to a price change we call the price elasticity of demand. And notice it's similar to the slope of the demand curve. Relatively flat slopes, well, these are ones where people are very responsive to price changes. While really, really steep slopes, these are ones where people may not change their buying patterns even when there's a price change. So it's one that you can raise the price and not lose that many customers. So it's something that we really need to think about. And we're going to do that by calculating the price elasticity of demand. So the price elasticity of demand, like I said, it's a unit-free measure. It's our way of comparing all types of goods together. Toilets have a price elasticity of demand number. This lotion has a price elasticity of demand number. This pen has a price elasticity of demand number. And if one is 5 and one is 4 and one is 2, well, that's something that we can compare together to understand these relationships. So let's first work through an example problem. Let's say that we're in a situation, and this is one of the easier ones, so don't worry, it's going to have math, but it's not the scariest math. And we're going to talk about, this original price point and a new price point for pizza. So let's draw it out to the side while we're thinking about this. Let's say that we originally have a pizza. So let's see. Downward sloping demand curve. Let's say that we have a $20.50 pizza. Okay, $20.50, sort of pricey. All right. And when we have that price point, the quantity demanded will be 9. 9 pizzas are sold at the $20.50 price point. Let's say that we're like, we're wondering how responsive people are to price changes. We're going to give out a $1 coupon, right? So with a $1 coupon, let's say the new price point is $19.50. Well, at $19.50, maybe the quantity demanded is 11. Well, that means that we have a $1 price change. And what we're going to have is a, what is this? 2 pizza change. So the change in pizza is 2, the change in price is 1. Okay, all right, well, let's see what we're looking at. The price change in the quantity demand divided by the price change in, or the percentage change in price. So this is what the equation for the price elasticity of demand is. So here, we'll write it down right here. Price elasticity of demand. This is equal to, and I'm going to use some notation from math because this is very normal in economics. You might have seen it before. When we're talking about the percentage change of something, we have percent sign and then a triangle. In math, this delta symbol, this represents a change. So percentage change in our quantity demanded relative to our percentage change in price. Now we're going to go through this in a little bit, but the price elasticity of demand specifically is always positive. So we don't really need to worry about negative numbers. We're just going to think about what the overall price changes are. So this first piece right here, let's solve the top half of this equation for our price elasticity of demand equation. Percentage change in quantity demand. How we're going to find a percentage change in quantity demand in this course is going to be the change in the quantity demand. So in this case, that's our 2 pizzas, correct? It's going to be our 2 pizzas. And we're going to have our change in the quantity demand divided by the average quantity demand. Okay, well, our average quantity demand, 9 plus 11 divided by 2, that's going to be 10. On average, there are 10 pizzas here. So 2/10, that's going to be our numerator. Okay, then we need to divide it by something, right? Well, now we need to think about the bottom half of the equation, the percentage change in price. How we're going to calculate our percentage change in price is equal to our change in the price relative to our average price. Okay, well, let's see this one. Notice I gave pretty simple numbers so that we could do it fairly easily. How much did our price change? Well, our price went down by $1. So let's say that we have a price change of 1. Then we need to think what the average price of a pizza is. Well, if the pizza was originally $20.50 and we ended up after the $1 price change with a pizza that was $19.50, then the average price of a pizza, which is $20.50 plus $19.50, which is 40 divided by 2, which what's in the middle is $20. So this bottom is going to be 1 divided by 20. Okay, well, when we start to figure that all out, so we have what? 0.2 divided by what is that? 0.05? Yeah, 0.5. What this equals out to is 4. Woo! All right, so pizza has, in this situation, a price elasticity of 4. What does that even mean? Well, that means that people are fairly responsive to price changes. The percentage change in our price actually was pretty great compared to the pretty small compared to the percentage change in the additional customers that are coming through the store. I just think that that's really neat. And now we can figure this out for any type of thing. Now notice it's a units free measure. When I say the price elasticity is 4, I'm not saying for something, right? It's not 4 apples, 4 pizzas, 4 price dollars, 4 whatever. It's a units free measure so that we're able to compare different types of goods by putting them all in the same math language, right? Also, minus signs in elasticity, the formula will yield a negative value if you keep in that -1 for the -$1, but we're talking about magnitudes and absolute values, so we do not care about the negatives within the price elasticity of demand equation. We're going to care about them in future equations. We don't care about them here because all of the elasticities we are ever going to consider go in between 0 and infinity. And there's different ranges on them too. So let's actually think about what those different ranges might be. There we go. So when we're thinking about the price elasticity of demand, there's my pen. We have kind of a set of values that we can have. We can have all the way down from 0. That's just saying there is no response to price changes at all. You change the price and your customers do not care. They will always buy the same amount. It does not matter if it goes on sale. It does not matter if you raise the price. Always the same amount. Okay, then, so let's see. We call that perfectly inelastic. Then we have everything that's in between 0 and 1. So in between 0 and 1, we call this range inelastic. These are goods where they respond to prices, but not price changes, but not very strongly. This is the idea of like gasoline, right? If gas goes up 50 cents, well, that's actually a huge percentage change, but you really don't change your driving patterns all that much. You might avoid like a road trip, but you're still on your day-to-day life going to still pay for gas to go to work, pay for gas to go to school, pay for gas to go do other things, regardless of its price. So we have perfectly inelastic, elastic. Then we have one, we call this unit elastic. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. This is just a special case that doesn't really happen, but it's where the percentage change in price is equal to the percentage change in quantity demanded. So that's the idea. If you put something on sale in your store by 15%, it's 15% off sale and 15% more customers walk through the door. Okay, then we have, let me say we're going to infinity. We have in between 1 and infinity. We call this elastic. If a good is elastic, and notice that's where our 4 is, that means people are very responsive to a price change. If the price goes down, you have more people come into your store above what that percentage is. That's the idea of like there's a 15% sale and 30% more new customers come in, right? And demand this product. And then we get all the way down to infinity. At infinity, we have something called perfectly elastic. This is when people are extremely sensitive to price changes. You change the price of a good by a penny. You raise the good price of that good by a penny, and you will lose every single customer you have, every single one that you were going to sell, right? That's the idea of perfectly elastic. Now, perfectly inelastic, where people do not care about prices and will pay $1 or $1 million, and perfectly elastic, where people are so sensitive to prices that they'll rampage over a penny change. Those are extremes. They don't really necessarily happen every day in the real world, but we need them for the math. We need to know what those extremes are so that we can understand the relationship in between inelastic and elastic price elasticities of demand a little bit better. So remember, I already have it right here, but let's go ahead and write this again. This is for the price elasticity of demand. Now we're also going to go through the price elasticity of supply in a little bit. It's going to have this similar 0 to infinity relationship. Okay, all right, let's keep going. So with this, we know that minus signs don't matter. Don't even bother including them in the price elasticity of demand, and that it's a units free measure. So we have inelastic and elastic demand. This is just going to be going through what I just showed you, but putting it more into a graphical format, right? So with the inelastic and elastic demand, demand can be any of these things, right? People can be extremely, extremely sensitive to prices. They could be they couldn't really care about prices at all. It could just be anything in between. If the quantity demanded doesn't change with the price changes, so people buy or want the same amount regardless of price, then this is a perfectly inelastic demand. If the percentage change in the quantity demand, so remember this is the idea of being or having a score in between 0 and 1, the price elasticity of demand is inelastic. This is the idea that like price might change and the quantity demand will change, but by a smaller percentage than how the price is changing. If we get to the point where the responsiveness of people, the change in that quantity demand is greater than the price change, so a 15% sale bringing in 30% more customers, this is the idea of being elastic, right? If it's greater than 1 but not infinity, we have an elastic good. And then if we go all the way to the other extreme, we get perfectly elastic. That's the idea that people are extremely sensitive to prices. Now, when we think about it in a graphical format, we have to think, what would that look like? Well, notice that it can be straight up and down like our original example. Our demand curves can be relatively flat, but normally they're somewhere in between. The what is that word for how much something is sloped? The closer to right up and down it is, an extremely steep, steep's the word I was looking for, an extremely steep slope. Well, that if we get all the way, the more steep it is, the more inelastic it is, until we eventually get to a demand curve that looks like this. It just looks like an I. That's actually how I remember it. Perfectly inelastic demand, inelastic starts with an I. This looks like an I, right? That's the idea of, notice this part on quantity, whether it's a $6 good or a $12 good, it's actually the exact same amount that's getting demanded. Okay, so this is one part of the extreme. The other part of the extreme is a completely flat demand curve. This is where elasticity equals infinity. That's the idea of, like, notice people are cool paying $12. You make it $12.01, and we will never actually hit a quantity demand curve at that price point because people are not willing to pay anything above what that price is. All right, so there's many factors that influence the elasticity of demand, how responsive people are to these price changes. While there's a bunch, we're only going to talk about 3 in this course, right? The first is going to be the closeness of substitutes. The second is going to be the proportion of income spent on the good. And the third is going to be the time elapsed since a price change. So let's break down each one of those by themselves because it's really important to understand what they mean. So the first, closeness of substitutes. Okay. The closer the substitutes for a good or service, the more elastic the demand for the good or service is. Let me tell you what that means. Okay. All right. If I were to tell you, oh, there's a huge tax if you go to Taco Bell, right? I am raising the price of Taco Bell. And I know at 3 a.m. when you're sad and you want Taco Bell, that sucks and you're going to be upset. But what else are you going to do? You're going to say, you know what? I don't need Taco Bell. That's fine. That's fine. It's right next door to an Arby's or there's a KFC. So you have lots of additional substitutes. So if the price of Taco Bell skyrockets, you can say, you know what? I don't like these other options as much, but I can switch to another option. I can have less Taco Bell and more Arby's, right? But what if it was something more broad? What if I said, okay, I'm going to put a $1 tax on all food whatsoever. Every bit of food has a new tax on it. Well, it means that there's a price increase for all the food in the world. Well, you don't have a substitute for food. you have to have food. That's like one of those things you have to have. There's no close substitute. So that's something that you will have to continue to buy. You'll be relatively inelastic. You'll keep buying food even if all food's more expensive. While you might be more elastic to Taco Bell. If Taco Bell has an additional tax that does not affect anything else, then you might reduce the amount of Taco Bell you have and switch to another good. So the closeness of substitutes really matter. There's some things that don't really have substitutes. The internet, right? You can't really give up the internet. That would be very difficult for you to do. You couldn't take this class if you randomly decided to give up the internet, right? There's no close substitute. So if your internet service provider, if it's the only one in your town, decides to raise your price, you tend to have to pay it. But if it's something like, I don't know, I have a coffee from Sacred Grounds right up the street. Well, the Sacred Grounds coffee, if they wanted to massively raise their price, there's Artisan 222. There's the juice place, our Source Juicery, that also has coffee. There's like 6 other places to get coffee on Main Street in Edwardsville, right? So like if this one were to raise the price of their coffee by a lot, I have substitutes. So we have to think about if you have substitutes or if you do not have substitutes. If you have lots of substitutes and other options, you tend to be more elastic. You tend to be able to be more responsive to price changes. While on the other hand, if you don't have substitutes, you tend to be more inelastic. You're going to have to kind of continue paying for that good, even if the price goes up, because you don't really have a lot of other things. We can also break this down into necessity versus luxury goods. Necessities generally have pretty inelastic demand. You need food, clothing, shelter, water, right? You can't really go without those. Internet too. Like honestly, you can't really work in modern society without having some sort of connection to the internet. Having all of these basic things, these are relatively needed in life, right? They don't have good substitutes. You can't give up food, you can't give up clothing, you can't give up shelter, you can't give up internet, you can't give up water, right? Like these are the basic things to get through life. So because of that, you're going to be relatively inelastic. You're not going to change your quantity demanded for these goods because they're things that are needed. All right. Then on the other side, we have luxuries. Luxuries are things you tend to be a little bit more elastic to. You know, let's say it's an exotic vacation. You are going to go hiking in a volcano in Iceland, but they just raised the price of those packages so much. It's now so expensive to do it that you'll say, you know what? That's fine. That's fine. Instead, I'm going to go hiking in the Amazon, or I'm going to go on safari with the Maasai tribes in Kenya and Tanzania, right? Like you have things that you can kind of adjust to or be more elastic to. It's the idea of like the prices of for like, you know, rich people, because I will never be in this position in my life. So I'm just talking about like the idea of out there. But let's say that you're a person who can afford a bunch of luxury boats and luxury planes and your own personal helicopter. Well, if you're in that sort of luxury world, if the price of personalized yachts skyrockets, you can just say, and switch to planes, because you have other modes of transportation that you can have for entertainment. Those might be more elastic, where you can be responsive to these price changes. All right, the second thing is the proportion of the income spent on the good. The greater the proportion of income spent on a good, the larger the elasticity of demand. Let me put it to you this way. You ever been at the checkout counter? I'm sure you have, where you're getting groceries and then you look over and that Reese's, it's staring at you. It's just like, you know, I could go for a Reese's. I did shopping. I left the house today. Like I could get myself a Reese's, because Reese's are $1, right? That's not a very big portion of my income. Like I teach for a living, but I could definitely afford some Reese's. So I can look at that and be like, well, whether it's $1 or if it's $1.25, that 25% increase in price, that doesn't really matter to me, because it's such a small percentage of my income. I can still, you know, make choices on it, or decide to get something and be like, I'm relatively inelastic at this point. If it's $1 or if it goes up by 25% to $1.25, like I'll still get it because it's what I want. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure most of you have had to deal with this too, where you go in and you need a new car, right? You're beat up 2009 Chevy Equinox that's had the lights on for months. I'm talking about my own life because my car is falling apart and I'm very much trying to avoid buying a new one. But let's say that your 2009 Chevy Equinox is just busted, right? It is busted. You have fixed it with spare parts from the junkyard so many times in your own front yard. Okay, well, now you got to get a new car. So when you're considering a new car, you might think like, okay, so maybe a new Chevy Equinox, or maybe a Bentley, or maybe, I don't know, what are other cars? Like Acura. Well, when you're shopping for cars, the difference in between, for example, a $30,000 car, you look at that and you say, okay, it's a large portion of my income. This is something I got to take very seriously. Well, if the Reese's had a 25% price increase, I didn't really care, right? That was the Reese's at the checkout counter. That didn't take much of my income. I'm fairly inelastic. If this $30,000 car increased and had a 25% premium on top and was getting closer to $40,000, I can be relatively elastic to that, right? That's when I'm responsive to these percentage changes in price. That percentage change in price for a lot, or like a good that has a lot of your yearly income going into it to pay for it, people in their quantity demand is going to be very responsive to price changes. If something gets more expensive by 10% or 25%, because it's such a large portion of their income, they're probably more likely to walk away. Likewise, this is why at the end of the year, when they need to get rid of old stock and they're wanting to be able to get rid of it before property taxes are due on the cars that you own, right? They put the giant, massive decreases in the cost of cars. They'll say like, end of year holiday sale, 10% off vehicles. Like they do that because they know that people are very responsive to these price changes. So a 10% sale on cars, well, for representing something so large in your income, like you're going to be very responsive to that price change. You'll say, you know what, we're gonna have lots of people coming in here and buying those cars now because that's a great deal for something that's so expensive. So the higher the proportion of your income that you spend on it, the more elastic. Oh, all right, we're getting through. I promise we're getting through. Time elapsed since the price change. The more time consumers have to adjust to a price change, or the longer that good can be stored without losing its value, the more elastic is the demand for that good. Let me tell you, let me give you this one. All right. Let's say that mac and cheese goes on sale, right? It's that like 10 boxes for $10 sale. If you're someone who has lots of kids who like mac and cheese, you probably understand the idea that like, that's a good deal. And mac and cheese is fairly shelf stable. So you can buy 20, 30 boxes and you can just put them away for a long period of time. You can be very elastic to this price change because it's something that you can buy on sale now and store for a long time. I do lots of arts and crafts. Like I like knitting sweaters. I like making candles. I make soap. I do a bunch of other stuff. If it's something that I can store, then if it's on sale now and it has a long shelf life, and I expect that the price is going to go up in a couple weeks, I might buy a lot of something right now and just save it for later, right? I can be very responsive to it being cheaper now if I expect, one, the price to go up soon, and two, if it has a long time it can be stored without losing value. This is also the idea that if I think a price change is very, very far away, so like maybe I want to buy, I don't know, I bought these glasses, right? I bought these like about a year ago and I like them. If I knew the price was going to go up in the future, but it was going to be years from now, like I looked at it, I'm like, oh, okay, prices seem to go up for glassware every decade or so. I can hold off 6 months on buying these. If I knew this is temporarily on sale now and the price is going to go up in 2 weeks, I might be much more willing to need to buy it now, right? So my brain just gave up right there for a second. So the more time you can adjust to the price change, the longer I can store something, the more elastic I can be, the more responsive to price changes I can be. If it's something I need right now, I might be more inelastic. For example, you need to you have a rental car due at noon, right? We've all been through this. You're at the airport, you got to return your rental car. It's due at noon. It's like 11:45. You have a choice of, you can even turn in your rental car and it be low on gas and they charge you $5 a gallon, or you can stop by the very expensive gas station right next to the airport that's like $4.50 a gallon. You don't have time, like it's due now, you're relatively inelastic, you're going to have to purchase this expensive gas one way or the other, right? If you had more time, the rental car is due in 4 or 5 hours, you can drive across town and get the cheaper gas and then come back. right? So your price elasticity matters for if it's a right now problem, relatively inelastic, or a you have time to decide problem, more elastic. Oh, all right, we're getting it. So we need to think about elasticity along a linear demand curve. So we like to think about, okay, so the 45-degree ones is a relatively uninelastic. If we have it flatter, that's relatively elastic, and really, really steep, inelastic. But sometimes we need to think about what's happening along that curve too. So if we have something that's a relationship in between lots and lots and lots of prices, we need to think about maybe what's happening. So a lot of the time we like to start with the midpoint formula. We kind of take right in between on a line like this that has this curvature. So it's not perfectly elastic, it's not perfectly inelastic. We tend to take this middle point and then say, okay, well, if the midpoint of this, so maybe a $12.50 pizza, we might say above $12.50 that people are relatively elastic, right? If that pizza goes from $15 to $20, you're probably going to lose a lot of business. While if that pizza goes from $20 to $15, you might get a lot more people into the store. But at lower levels, we might see that it's more inelastic, right? Let's say that we have a $5 pizza. Well, at a $5 pizza, you already have almost all the customers you could ever have coming into your door. So if you switch the pizza from like $5 to $4 or $5 to $6, notice that you don't really change the amount of people in your store as much or by as much of a percentage. Because if we're going from 35 to 40 customers, that's very different than if we're going from 5 to 10 customers. Both are an increase of 5 customers, but relative to the total amount of customers already in the store, or the total amount already being demanded, or the quantity being demanded, well, that 5 extra customers is an entirely different world when it's your first 5 relative to when it's one of your last 5, right? So it's just the idea. We're not going to go too deep into it. It's not something I really ask about all that much. It's just something you need to be cognizant of when we're thinking about prices and quantities. We're thinking about a range of prices and quantities. And there's going to be a price point where nobody wants to buy your good. $25 for pizza, you're not going to have any customers. So going from $20 to from $25 to $20, well, you might gain 10 customers. And that's actually a huge change for you. You have massively expanded. While on the other hand, if you have $5 pizzas with 40 customers and you drop it to free pizzas, like, okay, all right, well, in that case, I get 10 more customers, but I'm not making any revenue at that point. Why would I want to do that? Well, then that comes to the idea of revenue. In all of this so far, we've been talking about this really cool relationship in between what happens to prices and quantity demand, but we're not thinking about bank accounts at the end of the day, because you know what we need to know is, as people demanding a product, what's going to happen to our bank account? Or as people selling a product, how much will be in our bank account? Those are very important things to know about. So we got to think about the total revenue from the sale of a good. And the total revenue that we can get from a sale of a good is really going to be related to price changes and how responsive people are to price changes. If I know that we are in a very inelastic market, so people, they're going to buy about the same amount no matter the price, then I could raise the price and make more revenue, right? But if I knew I was in, for example, a market that's really elastic, I know if I raise my price that I'm going to lose a lot of customers. But I also know if I lower my price, I will get a lot of new customers. So knowing this relationship, I have to think about what's happening with the total revenue and elasticity. Where we typically start with this is thinking about the total revenue test. So the total revenue test sounds scary. It's not. It's not even something we have to think about too hard, and it's nothing that you have to write math about. It's more a thought experiment, right? So the total revenue test is the method of estimating the price elasticity of demand by observing the changes in the total revenue. It's the idea that if we're looking at the bank account of how much actually goes into it, and we know some ideas of what's happening if the price went up or down, then knowing those two pieces of information, we can tell what's happening with the price elasticity of demand. It's super cool and it's super neat to think about. So actually, let me set up a couple graphs real fast for us to be able to look at. So let's say we have a price, we know what's happening with price, and we know what's happening with total revenue, and we know what's happening with demand. Or we're trying to figure out what's happening to demand. So this is going to be our mystery point. Well, what the total revenue test tells us is the relationships in between them. And I can show you what this looks like in a couple minutes, but first let's talk about the relationships. These are the ones that I've listed on the slides if you want to follow along, but I didn't want to have both sharing at the same time. So the first one that we have in the total revenue test is thinking about a price cut. If we know that when price goes down, that total revenue goes up, this is the idea that, okay, all right, price went down 15%. We had a 15% sale, and then we doubled our amount of money in the bank account, or the amount of revenue that we were getting. That's, well, then in that case, what kind of price elasticity of demand do we probably have? Well, if that happened, if we had a price cut, but the total revenue went up, the total amount of the bank account went up, well, then that means more people must have came through the store, right? More quantity demand must have happened. People must have been very responsive to that sale. This is the idea that, like, we have a 15% off sale and get 30% more customers. So in this case, if we have a relationship where we see that price goes down and total revenue goes up, we know that the price elasticity of demand must be elastic, where people are very responsive to prices. So we're getting a bunch of new customers for a sale. Okay, on the other hand, we might have it where the price goes down, right? We might have the same price cut. Let's say 15% sale. Well, if we have a 15% sale and we have a decrease in total revenue, right? Or no, hold on. What did I just do here? Price down, total revenue goes up, elastic, price down. Ah, I see what I just did. Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me just erase some stuff. Actually, no, we're not going to do that. Sorry, I keep changing my mind. Now we're just going to keep on this. So let's say that we have this price cut. Okay, price cut happens. And let's say it's a 15% sale, right? 15% sale. Great, great. If I only get an additional 2 or 3 customers in my store for this 15% sale, well, what does that really mean? That means that people weren't very responsive to this price difference. That means that in my total revenue, I'm losing money from running this sale and not gaining any additional money from new customers coming into the store. If we have a price cut, but total revenue goes down instead of up, we know that we're going to be inelastic. People weren't very responsive to prices. If you're putting on a sale, people aren't coming in, right? And then if we know that it leaves it relatively unchanged, so we have a 15% price decrease and we get 15% more customers and total revenue is the exact same, we call that unit elastic. We don't really talk about that in practice. It doesn't really matter. Let's think about price increases though. These ones I don't have on your slides, but they're really important to know because I think I talk about them in either the assignments or the quizzes. So let's say that we have a price increase instead. Let's say price goes up. Well, we need to know what happens when price goes up too. So maybe let's say that this is ice cream, right? Well, it's hard to know if ice cream's elastic or inelastic, but let's think about what happens to the total revenue. Well, if we see that we raised the price of ice cream because, maybe it got more expensive for us. We got suppliers coming in, or maybe we just wanted to see if we can make a couple extra dollars. Well, if we raise the price and the amount of money in the bank account goes down, right? We have less revenue, then we know that this was elastic. People were very responsive to this price increase. It's the idea of, I had to raise my prices by 15% and I lost all my customers. This is an elastic demand, our price elasticity of demand. If we have the fourth situation where price goes up and total revenue goes up, well, this one's kind of special. That's the idea of I raised my price by 15% and only lost 5 or 6% of customers, right? I'm making more money in my bank account. I'm making more revenue overall with this price increase because people were still buying a similar amount to what they did before the price increase. These are inelastic price elasticity of demand. Okay. All right, so that's the 4 different types of situations that we could have when we're thinking about this relationship in between price and total revenue. What the total revenue test tells us is just the relationship in between those. All right. When we're drawing them, we kind of think of total revenue as a bell shape, right? So notice I said, okay, all right, well, when things are elastic and the price, or excuse me, how do I think about this? So when demand is elastic, right? When we're at a point where people are very responsive to price changes, then when we cut prices, there's going to be more money in the bank account, right? That's what we just saw when we talked about the total revenue test. Well, at the original part of this line, going from a $25 to a $20 pizza, we've gone from 0 customers to 10 customers. That is way more money in the bank account. So we went from $0 to positive dollars. Notice that the total revenue, that's this one on the left, the amount of money that goes to your bank account, it starts to go up, right? It starts to increase when we have these original price cuts. So as we have more quantity, so more quantity sold, we consider that first pizza, that 5th pizza, that 10th pizza, we see that though the price is going down for those pizzas, that the amount of money in the bank account goes up. Great. Wonderful. All right. So eventually we get to a point where we've had all the increases in the amount of money in the bank account. We have now cut prices to the point where cutting the price is equal to about the exact same amount of additional people we're going to get in through the door. It's going to be equal to about the same amount we're going to affect revenue, right? Here we have that at the place called unit elastic. That's the idea of a 15% sale on pizza brings you 15% more customers. We see that right at 25 pizzas. At that point, we have maximized the total possible amount we could have in our bank account. Okay. After that, it's all downhill from there. You already have so many people in your store that additional price cuts aren't going to help you that much. If I go from this $12.50, 25 pizzas to $10 pizzas, well, yeah, I'm getting slightly more customers, but only $10 a pizza. That's not a lot of money in the bank account, right? Or if I go to $5 pizzas, yeah, we're selling a lot more quantity. We're selling 40 pizzas. Notice right here, we have that 40 pizzas. But when demand is inelastic, a price cut decreases the total revenue. The amount of money starts to decrease the more and more sales we have because the additional amount of customers don't matter all that much. They're not very helpful. So one of the most important parts of managerial economics is understanding this relationship. When you're thinking about selling a good, you have to select a price point for it, right? And understanding how responsive your customers are to price changes tells you the range of total revenues that you could expect to have. Should you have a really high price but no customers? Well, then you might be right here, maybe making 150. Should you have a really low price and a lot of customers? Well, the price might be low enough that you're not making all that much. You might make a little bit of money. What you need to find is that sweet spot where you maximize total revenue, the amount or quantity that you can sell and the relative price to that quantity so that you can maximize the most amount of money in the bank account. And isn't that just neat? I love that. I think that that's so cool that we can kind of think about that. So this is just going back through in case you need to understand what it means to increase or decrease or to not change, or the difference between elastic and inelastic. I just keep this in the notes in case you want to reference it. Okay, so it's price elasticity of demand. We can do the same thing for supply when we're thinking about suppliers, which will have the same sort of relationship where we're thinking about the percentage change in price or the percentage change in quantity supplied relative to the percentage change in price. We're not going to go there right now because we have a lot of stuff to cover this week. Instead, what we're going to think about first is the income elasticity of demand. So the income elasticity of demand measures how the quantity demanded changes of a good relative to a change in the income, right? If all of a sudden everybody gets a 50% raise at work, that's great. Woo! But what happens? All right, if everybody gets a 50% change or increase at work, they're going out to eat more. They're going to more movies. They are buying a better car. We might see that there's a higher quantity demand for these luxury goods, right? But what's also going to happen? Well, when income goes up, you buy less ramen noodles. You go to the $2 theater less often. You buy fewer bargain movies from the bargain bin at Walmart, right? So there's some goods, we call them inferior goods. They're ones that you don't really buy when things are good, and you buy more of them the worse things are, like your ramen, like your bargain movies. Those ones we might have some sort of relationship with, whereas income goes up, the amount you buy goes down. While there might be normal goods, so we call them inferior versus normal goods, we have normal goods where as your income goes up, you purchase more of them. As your income goes up, you buy more luxury cars. As your income goes up, you have more meals out, right? They go in the same direction. So in this, we need to think about the income elasticity of demand. How responsive your buying pattern in a specific market is when quantity changes, or excuse me, when income changes. So when the income of individuals change, how does the quantity demand in a specific market act, and how they act in a specific market really depends on, is it a normal or inferior good. So with this, we're going to have a similar equation. We're going to have the percentage change in quantity demand, so the same top part, but the bottom part, instead of the percentage change in price, we're going to consider the percentage change in income. So let's actually go to our one note on that one, because this one's a little bit different from the price elasticity. So the price elasticities of demand, those ones, they can't be negative, right? Like we already said, doesn't really matter. We're thinking about absolute value. And these ones, they can be negative. So let's think about it. Oops, let's go down. All right, let's have our equation right here that we can think about so that we can have it for reference. Let's say our income elasticity of demand. All right, how responsive is your change in quantity demand, or the quantity demand in society within a particular market relative to changes in income? All right, so again, we have our percentage change. Percentage change would represent by our triangle of QD, quantity demand. If we were doing supply, then that would be an S there. All right, so then we're going to have that over our percentage change and income. Yeah, we're making it there. So what we're going to have, same thing as last time, we're going to have the top be the change in our quantity demand. So are we going from 9 pizzas to 11 pizzas, or 12 pizzas to 15 pizzas, or so on and so forth, divided by whatever the average quantity is. All right, the bottom part right here, this is going to be your change in income. So did you get a $50,000 raise? Did you get a $2,000 raise? Did you get a $20 raise? Did you get a 5 cents an hour raise? That change in income divided by whatever the average income is. Now, I don't really make you calculate it, but I do need you to know what these relationships are, because we have some different pieces here. So the first one that we can have is called, let's see, let's split it up into two, actually. We're going to have normal goods, which there's going to be 2 types of normal goods we need to talk about, and then we're going to have inferior goods. Okay, so in normal goods, let's have situation 1. These are going to be ones where you are extremely elastic in your quantity demand for income. This is the idea that you get like a 20% raise at work and you start going out to eat twice as often. Okay, well then if you're going out to eat twice as often, that is a really big change in your percentage change in quantity demand, right? So let's just say I'm going to represent that by a big arrow, big change in your percentage change of quantity demand, relative to a kind of smaller change in income. If you made only like a 10% raise and go out twice as much, notice like both of these go up, but this is going to be by an amount that's greater than 1. The top part of the equation will be larger than the bottom half of the equation. These are income elastic. You make more or people make more income and they have a quantity demand that's much higher for these. All right, then we have situation 2. These are also normal goods. We're going to buy more of them, but let's say that they're the idea of where your quantity demanded goes up, but by a smaller percentage than the amount that your income goes up. So let's say that you get a 25% raise at work. Well, maybe you go shopping 1 extra day a month, or you go maybe buy 1 extra pie, right? You were already going to buy 10 pies, but you buy an 11th pie for you because things are great, right? So if you buy 1 extra pie, you go from 10 pies to 11 pies in a month, which we're kind of like those crazy math problems that we always hear about, like, who buys 11 pies in a month? Doesn't matter. All right, so let's say you have a 10% increase in the amount of pies, but you had a 20% raise at work. So maybe the amount or the percentage that you increase in the amount that you're demanding, or the quantity that's being demanded, is going to be smaller than actually the amount that the income changed. So let's say if this is like a 20% raise, but you only buy 10% more of something, well, that's still going to be greater than 0, but it's also going to be less than 1. In this, we call these income inelastic. Your buying pattern's pretty similar when your income goes up. sometimes you might buy a little bit more. Income elastic is you're very sensitive to income and your income goes up and you buy a lot more. All right, then we have, so these are two different types of normal, oops. Aha, these are our two types of normal goods. Let's talk about the other type, inferior goods. So inferior goods, this is our third situation. So let's say that you get that 20% raise at work. 20%. Great. You love that. That's wonderful. What do you do to the amount of ramen noodles that you buy? Well, the amount of ramen noodles that you buy probably goes down. You're going out to eat. You're going to buy less ramen noodles, right? Ramen noodles will be considered an inferior good. If we have it so that the amount that you purchase or the quantity that's demanded of a good reduces when there is an income change, well, this is less than 0. And we call this an inferior good. Heck yeah. All right. So we're doing good. We figured this out. Let's go back to the slides. We're just trucking along today. We're getting through. I believe in each of you to do very, very well. All right. So this is just another one that kind of summarizes what those three situations are. Things can be above 1 and between 0 and 1 or negative for income elasticity. All right. Another elasticity. We have 4 or 5 different ways that we calculate elasticity. So the first one was thinking about how responsive people are to a change in the price of one good. Then we went to income, how much people change relative to a change in their own income for one good. Cross elasticity looks at actually the relationship in between two goods, right? This is how we figure out if something is a substitute or a complement. Substitutes are things that you can trade out for one or the other. It's going to be the idea of like, I can have blue pens or black pens. Well, if the price absolutely skyrockets for blue pens, I can switch and instead use black pens, right? These are substitutes for one another. Let's see, what else do I have here? Coffee and the little coaster thing that goes on coffee. Okay, well, if the price goes up for coffee, people are probably buying less coffees, right? Though there was no price difference whatsoever for the coasters, the quantity demanded of those coasters might go down because of a price difference that happened for the coffee. This is the idea that they might be complements. If the price goes up in one, the quantity demanded for both goes down because they're generally used together. All right, so do we really want to calculate this? I don't really ask you to calculate this anywhere. I just need you to know what it is. So actually, yeah, we're still going to talk about it. Let's still talk about it. Let's go ahead and try to just calculate in between the two what they necessarily mean. All right, so when we have our cross price elasticity, so we're going to say, you can call it cross elasticity, you can call it cross price, that's fine. Cross price elasticity. The equation for this one is just going to be the percentage change in the quantity demand. Here's the important part of good A, right? We're going to have a good A and a good B. All right, relative to the percentage change in the price of good B. What happens to the change in how much people demand of a product relative to a price change in a different market, right? So we have two situations that happen here. Let's have situation 1. All right, let's say that this happens to be that the price of, let's see, what's a good one? Blue and black pens. Let's say that the price of blue pens has gone up. That's our good B. So if, whoa, I just accidentally, what am I doing? One day I will learn. One day I will learn. Today is not that day. Tomorrow's not looking. Okay, sure. Did I break it? I hope I did not break it. Please work. Please don't do crazy things. It's messing up on me. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. So let's say that the price goes. Okay. We would like, what a day, huh? Okay, we'll just kind of talk through this. Let's say that the price goes up for blue pens. So let's imagine that we have an upward facing arrow on the bottom of this representing that an increase has happened. Then let's think about the quantity demand of the other good. So if the price has skyrocketed for blue pens, what happens to the price of the quantity demanded of the black pens? Well, the price goes up for the blue pens. We don't want them. Throw it away. We don't need them anymore. No, thank you. We instead will go purchase more of these relatively affordable black pens. Great. Wonderful. Well, then that means that we have an increase. So a positive number on top of a positive number. So an increase in the price of one and an increase in the quantity demand of another. This is a positive number. That means that they are substitutes for one another. I want one or the other. Now let's think about this as the coffee filter coffee example, right? If the price goes up for coffee, so we have an increase on the bottom part of this equation, we have an increase in the price for coffee, then the quantity demanded of the coffee little holder thingies goes down, right? They tend to be used together. If the price of coffee goes up, we don't buy coffee anymore. We're like, no. So the little holders that hold them probably don't buy as many, right? So if we have a decrease in the quantity demanded for coffee holders, so a decrease, a negative number divided by an increase in the price of one, so a positive number, a negative number divided by a positive number, this equals a negative number, right? If the cross price elasticity is negative, then what we know is that we have a complement. A complement is just, oops, when we can use one or the other. All right, I'm going to pause the recording to fix this pen real fast. We're back. Look. Oh, no, don't mess up now. Yeah. Smiley faces for days. Okay. All right. So positive numbers for cross price elasticity are substitutes. Negative numbers are complements. Remember, substitutes are when you can use one or the other. Complements are things you typically use together. Woo, we're making it through. All right. Got the last one for you. Last one we're going to do. This is the price elasticity of quantity supplied. So notice we've been looking at the price elasticity of quantity demand in almost all of these. It's how does the amount that people want of a good respond to a price change, right? But purchasers and buyers are not the only people in a system. We also have the people who are supplying a good. And you know what? I am much more willing to make a product if you pay me $200 for it than if you pay me $1, right? How suppliers are going to react, well, they also have slope to their supply curves, right? Supply curves can be very, very steep, or they could be not steep. Actually, here, we'll just draw them out because I got the pin working and I'm awesome like that. Okay, so let's continue to have this up here, and then we're going to go down here. Yeah. All right, so with supply curves, let's say that we're going to have the elastic side on the left. So let's call this elastic. We still have our price, we have our quantity, and remember, supply curves are upward sloping. So what we could have is something like this, right? Supply. They might be elastic for many, many reasons. It might be that like it's so expensive to change out the equipment, right? Like when making something, changing out the equipment is tough. And you're going to kind of have to make the same amount of stuff with that equipment as possible until new equipment can come in or you can afford new equipment. So at the end of the day, if your only buyers are going to pay you $10 when you really would like 15, you might have to take the $10 and still supply that good, right? Until you get some new equipment or else you can afford new equipment. So you might not be that responsive to changes in price. You might have to make a similar amount. Maybe there's a limitation on your equipment, or maybe there's a limitation where you already have a bunch of inventory. So you might not be able to be that responsive. While on the other hand, you might be very responsive. Let's say that we're more, or yeah. Am I going crazy? I am going crazy. Okay, ignore everything I just said for the last 30 seconds. Sorry ahead of time. Let's instead say that when we have supply, we have two different types of supply. So in our elastic case, they can be very responsive to a price change. That's the idea of, you've gone from paying me $10 for my bar of soap to $12 to my bar of soap. I am absolutely going to increase the amount or the quantity that I supply, right? I might really want to do that. I am very responsive to people paying me more money and I'll make more stuff. Then we have the idea of inelastic supply. You're not very responsive to price changes At $10 or $12, you can't afford to get new soap making equipment. So you're kind of going to have to take what the market pays you. So in that case, your quantity might only shift by a little bit. You might increase by a bit more. You might want to make a whole bunch more, but you can't afford to scale up right now, right? It might be great if people are paying me $12, but if I don't have any additional workers and I don't have any additional manpowers or hours, I might not be able to respond to that price change by the same amount. Whew, okie dokie. All right, let's keep making it through. Sorry for the confusion there for a second. Can you tell it's been a long day? Anyways, so in this, we're talking about the elasticity of supply. Are we very, very responsive to price changes? Are we saying like, you're paying me more, I'm going to make so much more stuff? Are we saying like, oh, no, you're going to pay me 10% less? I'm not going to bother making this. I'm going to make something else. In an elastic world, or in an inelastic world, are we going to say, oh, I really don't want to take $10, but I will because I still need to produce this, or $15 is so good, but I can't really scale up. I don't have any more hours to be able to make things. You may not be able to change the amount that you're supplying by all that much, or the quantity supply. So in this case, we have, when we're calculating the elasticity of supply, is the the percentage change in quantity supplied relative to the percentage change in price. Much like in the last couple ones, let's just sort of draw out what that means or write out what that means. Okay, so with our price elasticity of supply, see, price elasticity of supply. In this, we have similar pieces, right? So notice we have our percentage change in quantity. That's the same part as the price elasticity of demand, except notice we have an S here. Ooh, we're thinking about the supply side now. Okay, relative to the percentage change in the price of that good. Okay. All right. Well, let's think about what this necessarily means. Let's maybe think about a couple examples of what we would be seeing here. If you remember earlier, I had mentioned that this is a units-free measure for the price elasticity of demand in between 0 and infinity. Well, we have the same thing here. So here we have our perfectly inelastic supply. It's perfectly inelastic. We're relatively up and down. So if we got to something where maybe, for example, there was 0 change in the amount that I was supplying relative to a 20% increase in price, that 0 just means that I am not changing the amount that I'm supplying at all. This case right here, this would be perfectly inelastic. Okay, then in between 0 and 1, we have inelastic. This is the idea that maybe there's a 20% increase in price. I can increase the amount that I am providing to customers by 5%. Okay, well, at the end of that, that's like what, a 25 for elasticity? Well, our elasticity is 25 or 0.25, sorry, 25%. That's in between 0 and 1, right? This is relatively inelastic. I can't scale up all that much, even if people are paying me more. Then we have 1, which is unit elastic. People pay me 20% more, so I produce 20% more stuff. Then there's 1 to infinity. This is the elastic supply. And then over here we have perfectly elastic. So in elastic supply, what we have, that's the idea that like, my customers are paying me 20% more. I am going to ramp up production. That is enough for me to buy another line of my factory. That's enough for me to hire more employees. Maybe I'm going to increase production by 40%. Well, 40% relative to the 20% price change, maybe that's 2. That's in this elastic zone. I'm very, very, very responsive to this price change. And I'm just like, heck yeah, that's great. We're going to scale up. All right. Whew. All right, so with that, we have our same 3 different graphs. We can have either a perfectly up and down inelastic supply. So notice that also looks like an I, much like we had in the price elasticity of demand. For the price elasticity of supply, perfectly inelastic also looks like an I. The amount that is supplied does not change no matter how much people are paying them, right? Then we have perfectly elastic supply. I don't even like talking about the situation because it almost never exists. It's where suppliers will only accept one price, and that is the only price. And if you try to give them more money, they're not doing it. And if you try to give them less money, they're not doing it. That Does not happen in practice. I don't even like to consider it for suppliers. All right, then we have everything in between, right? So we might have things that have an elasticity closer to 1 in their midpoint, or 1 in another midpoint. Anyways, things that have some curvature to them. You can have some amount of responsiveness to a price change. Woo! So much like that, there's factors that influence the price elasticity of demand, there are factors that influence the price elasticity of supply, or how suppliers are going to respond to price changes. First is going to be resource substitution possibilities, and second is just going to be time frame, right? Knowing that your customers are paying you double really changes what you do tomorrow versus what you can do a year from now, right? The decisions that you can make can be very, very different. So first, resource substitution possibilities. The easier it is to substitute among the resources used by a producer to provide a good or service, the greater the elasticity of supply. Okay, if I'm making pizzas and I'm making $10 pizzas, and for some reason my customers have been driving up the price and they're going to start paying me $15 for pizza, well, okay, that's a 50% increase in the price. Well, what can I do here? Maybe I have some substitutions possible for the resources I use, right? Like I've been using a pizza oven, I've been using flour, I've been using tomatoes, I've been using everything else. Maybe instead of getting fresh tomatoes from the garden, I'm just going to substitute in, and I'm going to go get canned tomato sauce, right? If I use that canned tomato sauce, I can produce twice as many pizzas. So I'm not taking all that time making sauce. So people are paying me this amount. I can produce more because I'm going to be able to substitute one of my resources for something easier so that I can scale up faster. I have gone from fresh tomatoes to canned tomatoes. It's fine. Resource substitution possibilities means that you can be more responsive to these price changes. You can scale up easier, or you can reduce easier, right? If all of a sudden you make $10 pizzas and everybody comes in and they will not pay you more than $5, then in that case, I might also say, well, okay, I'm just not going to do that. I can use cheaper resources, or I can maybe change all of my other pieces, and I'm just not going to supply as much. Maybe I can be very responsive to that price change because I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's other things that I could produce or other ways that I can produce it. All right. So resource substitution, those matter. The second one is time frames. So we have to think about the idea of short run supply and long run supply. Everybody who's into business understands the idea that like the decision you make today is way different from the decision you make when you have years to plan for it. If I have a pizza store and everybody's coming in and they're screaming and excited because pizza is trending on Twitter. They love it. They're wanting all the pizza for Instagram. Well, what happens at that momentary supply with what I have right now? Well, that's perfectly inelastic. I have the amount of tomato sauce and the amount of dough and the amount of people working for me that day as I do for all of my resources right there. I am stuck with the same amount that I can supply at that moment. But let's say, okay, all right, I see people are freaking out. I see that they really want pizza. I can do nothing about it at this moment. At this moment, I am perfectly inelastic. I cannot change the quantity that I'm supplying, but I can change it this week. So if I know that this is happening this week, I can call up all of my friends at the distribution and ask them for more supplies this week. I can call up my workers and ask a couple more of them to be able to come work. I can get more hands on deck. So in the short run, I can be somewhat elastic. I can scale up a little bit, right? But I'm still fixed to the amount of capital. I still only have the building that I have and the number of pizza ovens that I have. I can't really change that in a week. So I'm relatively elastic to how much I can ramp up or ramp down production in a week. Now let's think about long run. If I know that this is going to keep up and I know that people are going to start paying me so much more for pizza for a long period of time, well, in the long run, what can I do? I say, okay, I'm going to open up 3 more locations. I'm going to hire some managers. I'm going to scale up. I'm going to invest in new oven technologies and get new oven technologies. And that's what we're going to do. So in the long run, you can be very elastic because you can change not only the labor and the ingredients, but you can change the capital components, the physical locations and the machines in the long run. So you can be very elastic in the long run to the decisions of your customers. Oh, all right. So we are done with part 1 of the roadmap. Don't worry, that was the longest part of it. And let's take a break. Get up, shake your legs, do everything else. I'll see you in the next video.